I felt like none of the contributions I was making in his life were finding a home, permanent home, but they weren't landing, or are they going anywhere? Is this making any difference? Because I'm intentionally pouring into this human being who's entrusted to my care. And some of that was around, I had a lack of that growing up. So there was a little bit of a mathematical equation in my mind of, if I do this, then it'll equal that, a better outcome, and an easier road of life. Turns out that was rubbish, for all kinds of reasons. But later, what I got to hear from him and continue to now, at 29, is how much he references back to those moments of goodness.
Well, as a launch in point, Aaron, I thought we'd start here. The phrase attentive aliveness. Attentive aliveness. I read this recently from a poem you released and a reflection on David White. Would you talk about what that phrase means to you?
Yeah, that's cool. That's fun that you pull that out. Attentive aliveness, what I noticed, I was describing a hike that we were on, my friend, and then this new friend, poet, David White. And I realized that we had this like connection. We were in Grand Teton National Park.
Mhm.
We were walking around this pedestrian trail, nothing arduous or too difficult, around Jenny Lake. And David White is a zoologist
Mm.
by training originally. So he spent multiple years in the Galapagos Islands, like in his young 20s. So he had this like particular attentiveness to the flora and fauna. We were reading one of the signs and we were wrapping a corner, and some of Wyoming's oldest known trees were about to come up on us in this grove. So I was just kind of noticing how attentive we were to all the particular things. This view, this light, this flora, fauna, this set of steps that was a staircase framed, and he pulled his camera out.
Yeah.
And then there was this aliveness around how we were just interacting together as, strangers, in that we'd never met before in this particular way, but companionship in the moment as just
Mm.
three guys, loving national parks and mountains and all the things. So it was a cool, I'm glad those two words found me.
I feel like delight is contagious. Like, so if you have a friend whose delight is like taking delight in something, it's like, oh, I want to actually be more interested as
Totally.
well.
Totally.
And that brings me to curiosity and just even running experience or experiments for curiosity. Can you think of, like, for dads in my phase, my oldest is 11, my youngest is 3, any experiment ideas to help stoke up kind of that attentiveness or curiosity?
Yeah, I love that, Jeff. I find curiosity, let's say I discovered it maybe formally as a practice when I was a young dad, probably mid 30s. And my life at the time was understandably overprogrammed, very, I thought of it like shift work. I woke up and it was the first shift at home with family, second shift at work, third shift back, felt like clocking back in. I would describe my experience of life differently now, but back then
Yeah.
that's what it was like, or at least that was my view of how I was experiencing my life. And curiosity became this rediscovering of wonder, basically,
Mhm.
of so much of my life. And the story I told myself at the time was that life is hard and my job is just to get through it.
That's it.
And I found that incredibly depleting,
Yeah.
in addition to the things that were objectively depleting. Some of those days were just long. Uh, pick cleaning up dirty diapers and taking out the trash and some days at work were challenging. That stuff was difficult already. And then I was making it more difficult by my way in which I experienced my life,
Hmm.
stories that had on repeat. So when I discovered curiosity as a aperture opening kind of escape hatch to explore alternate realities, essentially, then all of a sudden I was just laughing to myself recently because I remembered one of the first practices I had is I woke up and I was like, you know what? What if I go fishing before I go to work in the morning? Well, for us here in Colorado where I live, the nearest like proper trout stream is like an hour and 15 minutes away.
Okay.
So I could have done that, but I was like, no, actually, there's this one creek in the state park. I wonder if there's fish in it.
Yeah.
So curiosity took me on this tour. I
Hmm.
ended up, what I learned later was illegally fishing
Yes.
for these Colorado greenbacks
Okay.
and brook trout. And then I would go into these meetings and with fish smell on my hand, I wouldn't wash my hands.
Wait, intentionally, right?
Intentionally, yeah. Just to kind of have the joyful,
Aroma.
visceral
Yeah.
experience all day long. Yeah. So that to me was kind of the start of like, hey, hold on a minute. Wow, you mean if I actually prioritized curiosity and wonder and exploration in the life I already have,
Mm-hmm.
then you mean my life experience might begin to feel differently.
Yeah, you actually were breaking down those walls, those shifts, right? And
Oh,
scent is one of the strongest. I think scent smells like really can trigger deep memories and moments. So you were doing that with the smell of illegally caught
that's
fish.
right. Yeah,
I love that. I was going to ask about your golden doodle. Is it Lulu? Is this right? Is that
it is. It's
so
true.
we said goodbye to our golden doodle 14 and a half years though. So we had him. He lived a great life just 6 months ago. So anytime I learn that a friend has a golden doodle, I have to ask. But let's take the golden doodle and faithfulness is what I think of with the golden doodle and just like happy to see me, happy to stick with me. And I want to go to a Eugene Peterson quote. Here's what the quote is. We live in a culture where image is everything and substance is nothing. We live in a culture where a new beginning is far more attractive than a long follow through. Would you talk about your dog, Lulu, and that quote? And again, how it might apply to a dad listening?
Love it. Yeah, what a nice thread to pull on there. Well, Lulu is, let's see, she's 9,
Okay.
and she is, as you say, deeply faithful.
Yeah.
She's, for me, she's like yeah, a companion that I'll really, really, really miss one day when she's not here, as you're experiencing right now. What what I love about relationship with her is that how accommodating she is
Hmm.
to whoever I am that day.
That's it.
And there's a real beauty to that of yeah, just feeling appreciated, constant companionship, and also another kind of playmate
Hmm.
for me. And then the reflection that you have there from Eugene Peterson, what I really love about that line is I think it comes from his book, Running with the Horses, which is a book that he wrote about the life of Jeremiah and the book of Jeremiah in the scriptures. And what he talked about was this idea of this newness and for we as humans being addicted to the new and the novel and this maybe just yeah addiction.
Hmm.
This by contrast how a quiet, sustained, faithful, long follow through doesn't get near the amount of press. And yet we know in our actual lives, so back to your question about dads, I remember being at a Become Good Soil retreat and I went to, was part of them for 10 plus years. And this one particular guy asked this question, and he said, "Do you think quality time matters or intentionality with the amount of time I have, or something like that?" He
Hmm.
he said it in a clunkier way than that. But essentially, what he was asking was, if I go big and take my kids to Disneyland,
Sure.
does that matter more than ice cream on a Tuesday? What was cool is that whoever fielded the question said, "Yeah, love your question. It's not the right one.
Yeah.
It's not the right one.
Hmm.
Your kids are going to care a lot more about a long follow through than any of the fancy bursts and spurts and spats of courageous moments of heroicism."
Yeah. And it's so hard in the short term to live into that, into the non-sexy moments of just sticking with them and being the golden doodle. And really, of I enjoy being with you today, regardless of how you show up. Like, it's what I want. I want to talk about ones and tens. When I do one-on-ones with my, specifically my 8-year-old, we write on the placemat at the restaurant a 1 through 10, and then she can kind of point to her answers of ranking different things, and mostly ridiculousness, but some serious questions. And I read something you wrote around ones being excruciating lows, like ones describing a low moment of life, and a tens being this exuberant highs. I can't believe this is my life, and kind of marker moments that are joyful and tearful, and maybe a mix of both at times.
Yeah.
Uh, do you have any, maybe if you had a couple stories, you could pick a 10 or a 1, story in the dad life that did shape you, has shaped you, that you'd be willing to share with us? So, again, either a 10 or a 1 or one of each.
Yeah, great question again. A friend of mine is the one who named this idea of tens and ones years
Okay.
ago. And he was speaking specifically to how so much of life is like in the 3 to 7 range,
Yeah.
5 to 6.2, something like that. And he was talking about how we, kind of a question is, when do you have tens? What are your 10 moments? Kind of excluding, though, for a minute, oh, we went to Hawaii and we hiked Hilton Head. Like, okay, that's an easy one.
Sure.
Um, or, the birth of my child, their name, fill in the blank. My wedding day. Um, and then, so like the ones, I find everybody has a different version of what a one is to them.
Mhm.
So for me, the ones that I would share, so ones and tens are helpful for me just to orient that I end up using the same phrase, it just in a very different way. At a one, I've often said, "I can't believe this is my life." And then a 10,
Yeah.
I said, "I can't
Yeah.
believe this
Yeah.
is my life."
So true.
But it's the same
Same
couple of
words.
words.
Yeah.
It's the same words. And it's like one is exclamation and one is giant chasm level question. Like,
Crushing. Yeah.
dear God, really? How can I make it through this?
Hmm.
So for me, a couple of ones and tens, if I start with a one, is I remember the day that one of my close friends, my son, who was 18 at the time, got in the truck with them to drive from Colorado to Memphis, Tennessee to start rehab program for drugs and alcohol. And hugging him goodbye, we have these pictures still, my wife and I, the three of us standing out front in the driveway with him. And it was horrible. It was horrible because we didn't know how it was going to go. We didn't know if it would help, all the things.
Yeah.
So that picture and that moment
Mhm.
and the helplessness was definitely a moment of just a one, like, I can't believe this is my life. And I can't believe in hindsight, looking back, it was his life. So a contrast, a 10, I can't believe this is my life.
Mm-hmm.
I was just in Barcelona with him. Now he's 29, who, at the time 18. So he's knocking on 10 years sober and lives in Spain, in Barcelona. And we're at this restaurant called Cafe Lobo. And we are there with a sketch pad and we have these pencils and we're trying to figure out vanishing points. My brother's an architect, and so we were looking at some of the architecture and attempting to replicate the architecture in our drawings
Yes.
over dinner. And it was, he's sober, we're
Mm-hmm.
friends, he lives in
Mm-hmm.
Spain. It was like, I cannot believe this is my life.
Yeah.
And it's all one story. So that I would start, maybe that I could go on with many, but that's one that would begin.
Oh, a follow-up question on that story, and then I think I will ask you for two more because it's a great way to get to know somebody. If you went back 2 years before that driveway moment, and you were talking to a dad that's in your shoes, so their son or daughter is midway through high school, maybe in that range, and you could just like share a few like, hey, things I learned along the path. Again, imperfect dad to another imperfect dad, but hey, here's some things I learned. That it's not like they're going to guarantee that they're not going to be in a driveway with a friend saying, crying with their child as they head off to rehab, but that might just be of counsel and help to that dad in the high school years. What would you pass along or want to encourage them with?
Probably two things come to mind, Jeff. One is not to don't underestimate the constant presence of your life in their life over the long haul. And what I mean by that is there were so many times where shit was sideways and things weren't going well, drugs and alcohol and sneaking out and grades and all the cumulative. I felt like none of the contributions I was making in his life were finding a home, a permanent home, that they weren't landing, or they weren't, it's like, are they going anywhere? Is this
Yeah.
making any difference? Because I'm intentionally pouring into this human being who's entrusted in my care. And some of that was around, I had a lack of that growing up. So there was a little bit of a mathematical equation in my mind of, if I do this, then it'll equal that,
Mhm.
a better outcome and, an easier road of life. Turns out that was rubbish, for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah.
But later, what I got to hear from him and continue to now, at 29, is how much he references back to those moments of goodness, those investments, the kindness or the choices, or Friday mornings getting pancakes together, when he was in a car seat, dropping him off, at grade school. So that's really encouraging.
Mhm.
So I would offer that as encouragement to you dads in the middle of it now, in the thick of it now, is it really does matter. And it really does, somehow, some way,
Mhm.
it does find a home in them. And to me, it's kind of like the book of Proverbs. It's in real time, is that wins wisdom and insight and love does indeed matter.
Yeah. This next question comes from, and I might be pronouncing wrong, but is it uh, Lao Tzu? Am I
Yeah,
pronouncing
yeah,
that right?
yeah.
Yeah, the wisdom from his writing around be who you really are and go the whole way. And
Right.
and of course, I could have used John 10:10 or other references of like just being all in. But my daughters had the chance to play on a 1,000 acre ranch in South Dakota. And these were all brand new friends. We got invited off a church service. They were like, hey, come to this thing, this cookout. And they were just gone for hours playing. And they came back, and as they were like falling asleep, like on the drive back to the RV, They said, Dad, there were no fences and no rules. And I think like from gathering from your book, your podcast, your poem that you just wrote that we'll talk about a little more later, this like bring your full heart, go the whole way. Like, why hold back and live a 7 or a 6 when you could go after the 10, even if you miss it, right? I'd love for you to encourage dads to live that out, of course, imperfectly, but then why it's important to give our kids some of these, like, let's just go with our whole hearts and not play it safe. Could you kind of reflect on that, those themes?
I love the no fences, no rules. That was the
Yeah,
line.
yeah, and my wife and I like we still reference back to it, like their eyes of wonder of like, can you believe like as far as the eye could see, we can just go as far as we want. It's all good. And they were bleeding at they got themselves cut up, they rolled down, they were like bleeding and joyful.
That's fun. The best kind of fun. Cool. What great imagery. Well, maybe an entry point for your conversation is for each of us as humans, as each of us as dad and husband and friend and brother and employee and all the contexts we find ourselves in. Whatever is true in us will be true in the life that we live and in how other people experience us. And what I didn't know early on was that much of my life experience and the way in which I experienced my life was because of who I am and how I am. Maybe a quick illustration story is, and you may have heard the story before yourself, but your listeners may not have, is, and I tell it as an earnest confession, not as like a shtick. I went to Hawaii, my wife and I, we went for this 3 week holiday, 3 kids, and we were in paradise, no work. There was no Teams and Zoom back then so much, so I wasn't even logging into stuff. And I had this stack of books I brought with me and had this ambition to be the guy who reads in a hammock.
Yeah.
And I never cracked one book and I never read in a hammock. And what I found so interesting, I came back and I was with a friend of ours. He was asking me how to go. And I was like, you know what? I didn't realize this, but like the problem with vacation is I came with me.
Yeah, so true.
Like the same over caffeinated,
Mm-hmm.
driven, perfection oriented, hopped up guy I am here. I was the same guy in Hawaii. And like, how did I possibly do that? I had everything going for me. There was 3 weeks of just nothing planned, aloha spirit, flip-flops, I was like, how did I possibly miss the opportunity to lay in a hammock and read a book? And I was like, oh, you know what? I'm not someone who values rest.
Mm.
I'm not. Now I am. I wasn't then. So for me, the big learning was, hold on, time out. If my life, it, when I start with what I want the kind of the experience of my life to be, the experience in my family, the nature of the relationships that I have, the work that I do in the world, all of that starts with my inner life. And if for me, the more space and room I allow for God to renovate me from the inside out, then when I turn up in 1,000 acre ranch with barbed wire and cattails, I can really enjoy spacious places way more because I've prioritized becoming a person who can rest,
Yeah.
becoming a person who values play, becoming a person who values connection over accomplishment, Now, I still wrestle with all these things. They're just kind of hardwired in the way I learned to make life work from the beginning. At the same time, I believe all of us are a work in progress and under renovation, and there's a lot of hope to have around that. Summary is where I would start is start less on the externals and start more on the internals.